CPO. Our third speaker, Mutale Nkonde, the CEO of AI for the People, has recorded a video interview for you. One of our audience has actually mentioned in the chat that bias in algorithms is an issue. We couldn't agree more. So let's first hear from Mutale, a warrior of equitable AI systems. Robert, can you play the video right now?
I am a UN advisor on issues of race and AI. I'm currently writing a book, so first-time author, and I run a communications agency, AI for the People, that does targeted research on how AI technologies impact Black life and then turns them into cultural products. So we're involved, and one of the reasons I'm not with you in person, we're involved in an anti-disinformation campaign. So we have found a group of what we believe to be inauthentic actors that are posing as Black people on social media, and we are in the process of employing a strategy to disrupt those narratives. That is a technical question, and that really is, at least in my mind, an issue of technical racial justice, right? So why are platform companies not accountable for their algorithmic systems advancing these false narratives that will stop Black people from accessing the vote? And that's one of the major reasons that I got into policy. So that question around how are technologies racist paired with, well, what do we do about it, led to me working on the Algorithmic Accountability Act, in the Deepfakes Accountability Act, which looked at social media, and then no biometric barriers to housing, so facial recognition. We design technical systems. They're going to go through a process of testing to see whether the thing does what we think it should do. And we were advocating for the idea of impact assessment to be part of that. So, you know, really posing this question to lawmakers that had the advertising algorithm on Facebook being tested to see whether people were able to screen Black tenants out of their ads, what would that have meant? And if we find that, you know, drop down menu in that particular instance is a way that we can exclude people from society in ways that we have already acknowledged are not legal, then that shouldn't be released into the marketplace. The same for facial recognition technologies, which we know, thanks to the great work of Joy Buolamwini, misidentify Black people 40% of the time. Well, then we really shouldn't be commercializing those technologies and using them in body cameras or using them in doorbells, as is the case of Ring, right? And then it's not just the technologies, it's also third-party brokers. So for those that don't know, when we use cookies on websites, which luckily are increasingly not being used, but they're still there, at least with Google, which is a dominant platform until 2022. But the information about browsing history is mined by a third-party actor, so not Google, and then can be sold. So even increasing the public awareness of how these technologies are monetized and how that is very much reliant on personal data is a huge amount of the educational work that AI for the People did in Congress, but it also has to be encoded into law, and using justifications like right to privacy and warrantless search, like we have the right to not engage in warrantless search, become really useful vehicles, because at least here in New York, we've already decided that we don't want stop and frisk, right? That has already been struck down by the second district. Well, you know, some of these surveillance technologies are conducting a technical stop and frisk that I think needs to be stopped also.
You have tirelessly advocated for anti-racist policies to govern the design and deployment of AI systems. So what do you think are some of the best ways to empower technologies from traditionally underrepresented groups and providing access to the missing voices?
I would say that you're probably going to have to make your own path. So for example, I'm now somebody that's considered an expert that sits at the intersection of race and technology, but certainly I'm someone that Bruce Lincoln has known for many years as I've kind of built that trajectory. And when I started to really think about entering the tech system, it was actually in 2012. Trayvon Martin had just been killed, a Black teenager in Sanford, Florida. And I was working in New York City local government and really feeling grieved about that, feeling grieved that this teenage boy had lost his life and there wasn't going to be justice. And had got involved with the Million Hoodies Facebook group, which at that point, I didn't know that I was really entering into the optimization of an algorithmic system. As far as I could tell, I was going on Facebook, we were doing these actions, we were doing these marches. And I say all of that to say is this is a career that I created because I answered lots of different questions. And for me, the road has been entrepreneurship, but, even though it is social entrepreneurship, in the sense that I have my own organization, but I'm also quoted by tech companies all the time. I sit as an advisor on, I'm on the TikTok content advisory board. So I do play with industry as well. And then the work that we do in academia, I hold a current fellowship at Stanford University as well as at Notre Dame. And I was a fellow at Harvard last year, and this year I'm an affiliate. But the reason that we have university partnerships is really to advance our personal research into what that means. So I know that was a long, strolling answer, but in short, my advice would be, think about who you want to be in the industry and then find a road that will be long and will be windy that will take you there. And luckily for us, we're growing. So I will be really interested in hiring folks who are interested in racial justice and technology also.
Thank you so much, Mutale.
Thank you for inviting me. And I know that the conference will be excellent.
Wow, what a resonating story and exciting call to action. I hope everyone is feeling inspired by Mutale. I certainly am. So right now, I am very honored to ask Dr. Bryan and Shanna to briefly introduce themselves and give their opening remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bryan Carter, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Arizona in the Africana Studies program and the director of the Center for Digital Humanities there. Part of my opening statement involves, first of all, thanking Bruce and Clayton for allowing me to be a part of this amazing conference. I've learned so much, and we've been collaborating for so many years, and every time I'm in the same room as either one of those individuals, we always learn something from them, and I just really appreciate that. You put together an amazing conference here. Part of what the Center for Digital Humanities does, for those of you that aren't familiar with the term, is that we in the humanities will help faculty members incorporate a higher level of technology into their research and or teaching. We think that part of that mission also includes reaching out very intently to underserved groups, introducing and supporting various technologies as part of their mission. Part of what we heard a little while ago was that often people get behind the technological divide because either they don't know about it or they can't afford it. And part of what we do at the center is we work with those groups in order to keep them at the cutting edge of a variety of technologies so that they can forward their mission and be right in step with those like organizations. We definitely are anxious to be a part of the conversation that I know we're going to have here in the ways that we can help humanize the creation and the incorporation of technology in all of our walks of life. So I can't wait to talk about this topic. It's very important to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Carter.
Hi. My name is Shanna Crumley, and I'm the Innovation Advisor at the New York City Mayor's Office of the Chief Technology Officer. There I'm working at the intersection of agency innovation and the community tech, civic tech initiatives that we work with communities across New York City to bring tech-enabled solutions, but also largely speaking, just problem solving. Our office is very focused, to echo Dr. Carter's point, our office is very interested in making technology accessible. I think that accessibility component, whether it's due to cost or whether it's due to education or just some measure of inaccessibility, that's a huge emphasis for us. And then also just making it inclusive. So thinking from an inclusive perspective, how do we make technology human, right? Human-centered. And then finally making it useful. I think that there's often, technology can get into a space of being very aspirational and shiny and flashy and exciting, but making something that's actually usable and useful is very important. So that those are things that our office is thinking about. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much to Silicon Harlem, to the whole team for having us here. I'm excited to talk about the dynamics of technology and humanity and how those intersect. And I think that, to echo the conversation all day, I think that we have a chance. We're in a unique time in the history of humanity, the history of this country and our city. We have a unique chance to be able to build equality and equity and that accessibility into our technology and into our decisions. And so I'm excited to talk about human-centered technology, human-centered design, and making technology work for all humans, not just a few of us. So thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Shanna. That is so profound. We're so honored to have you here, Dr. Carter and Shanna. The topic of the summit is advancing humanity, just as you have touched already. Our audiences would love to learn more from you. What does advancing humanity mean to you?
Well, from my perspective, advancing humanity really means keeping the humanity focused and centered whenever we talk about technology. We've got to not get away from that. And when you think about how sometimes we see technology running away, we've just heard a very stark example of that with regards to facial recognition, bias in AI, and all the ways that that underserved groups are being disadvantaged by the runaway technology in many respects. Part of what we do in digital humanities is, in addition to using a variety of technologies in order to forward issues related to the human condition, we also take an extra perspective look at what technology is and really critique it in as many ways as possible. Not only its effects on humanity, but also looking forward and hoping to be a part of that whole conversation with regards to helping to shape the ways that technology is being developed.
Yeah, I agree. I think you made that point again of the humans at the center of technology and those decisions. I think more than ever this year, we're seeing the impact of technology on every aspect of our lives, where before it might have been it wasn't necessarily central to every single decision and interaction you had. And now here we are at the first ever virtual summit for Silicon Harlem. So we're getting used to this type of life. So I think that we need to commit to being human-centered when we start thinking about technology, and from the very beginning. So now that we are thinking about technology so much and that impact, making sure it's human-centered. It's been a fascinating year to be working in government and in local government. I think that before COVID-19, our office was, the CTO's office, the Chief Technology Office, which to some people sounds like this add-on, some extra flashy thing. They're going to talk about, 5G and only, exclusively AI. And then on the other hand, thinking, I don't understand how that impacts my life as a resident or my life as another, government agency. But then this year, overnight, government became digital. And overnight, we went from, your traditional government services and struggles and challenges and interactions to everything being technology-based by need, by necessity. So everything was suddenly, all government services were digital. That's everything from your education to the healthcare to employment to participating in the economy and accessing the services that you need. So suddenly, technology has become so necessary to everyone's work. And because of that, it's so clear the impact that technology has on people and the impact that technology has on government. So it's been an interesting year to think about what advancing humanity means in this context now, in this new world. I think one of the most poignant examples of this impact of technology on people and of government on people with technology is broadband access in New York City. This has come up several times today already, but just to touch on it again, I think as Commissioner Rosenworcel said, broadband access is now a need to have. It is not a nice to have. It is absolutely essential, and we definitely believe that at the CTO's office and in the New York City government that, we know that 40% of households in New York City don't have access to both home and mobile internet connections, which are both equally, extremely important for this now. And then there's 18% of households that have neither home or mobile internet connections, meaning that those people are completely cut off. And, in the era of COVID, that means that they're completely cut off from education and from accessing healthcare, from accessing unemployment and employment opportunities, and just being able to participate in our city, in our life, in our society. So this is absolutely essential. And so, you've heard some of the initiatives that our office is doing to try to address that digital divide in a way that is inclusive and accessible, and make sure that this is actually meeting the need, basic needs where we're at. When I talk about advancing humanity, I think it's also about committing to this human-centered approach, because technology is just a tool. And so making sure to also think about that as we look at talking about technology. That technology is not a solution, it's not the solution. It is a tool. It's simply one component of impact. But as you know, as we're talking about, technology is not neutral. It doesn't build equality in and of itself. It doesn't break down inequities. We have to see technology as part of this holistic system of problem solving, where we have to have good structure. We have to have thoughtful policies. We have to have human-centered design and human-centered thinking, good leadership, buy-in from residents, from the users that are going to be interacting with this type of work. And so just thinking about it in this more systemic approach, technology is awesome and can be useful, can be detrimental, can be harmful or effective, and it all depends on how the rest of the picture is thought about and informed. So I think when it's part of a systemic and human-centered approach, we have great opportunity for impact and meaningful improvements in lives. So I'm excited to talk further about that in the next few minutes.
Thank you so much, Shanna. Thank you so much for your very extremely powerful and timely message here. We're also, like what you're describing, we're in the age of digital government, and we know that you're leading through NYC Mayor's Office of the City a series of tech-enabled government services and initiatives. So in what ways do you think technologies are influencing our local government processes, and how can we encourage the local tech talent and innovators from underrepresented communities to contribute and engage in the local government?
Yeah, thank you, Claire. I think that to touch on the first question about what kinds of tech initiatives and how technology and innovation are influencing local government processes, something else we saw come out of the COVID crisis in New York City was an increase in interagency collaboration and innovation. I worked with agencies that I'd never even heard of before, because suddenly we had to, it was a crisis mode and everyone's had to start brainstorming and do like problem solving on the life and death level and on the immediate level. And so there's a lot of increase in collaboration and trying to find new ways to approach old problems and new ways to, figure things out very quickly and able to, in order to prevent massive crises. And so I think a really cool, pertinent example of this is our MICX Innovation Fellows program. I've been involved in the last few months, so it's top of mind, but it's something that came out of the COVID crisis, where the U.S. digital response was formed by tech CEOs from across the country, like former American tech CEOs, or CTOs rather, and other tech leaders. And they said, look, governments are needing help like immediately, urgently. There are technologists and experts across the country that are willing and able to help. How can we match these together? So the U.S. Digital Response, what we call USDR, was formed. And we were lucky to partner with them on some of the projects that John mentioned earlier around just trying to face the many challenges that cities and governments were facing during that time and continue to face, how do you run testing programs? How do you, build a platform to source equipment? How do you figure out food distribution in the era of, you can't have a line, out a warehouse anymore. And so trying to figure out how to do those things and use technology. So the idea was to pair top tech talent with government folks to identify challenges that people are facing and then rapidly build and deploy solutions. So it's this, I'm going to call it government agile, trying to think about it through that mindset where we are, rapidly building, testing, iterating, asking folks, if it's working, and rebuilding and continuing that process, but in the government timeframe. So we have been able to we just wrapped up the first cohort, which was an 8-week product sprint, and we were able to accomplish things that would have taken months and possibly millions of dollars to finish. And so I think this is kind of the sweet spot of where government and innovation and problem solving happens.
Wow, thank you, Shanna. We're all very impressed with the agile government that you're innovating in your work. Dr. Carter, on your website, there's a statement that really captures the spirit of your impressive project, Virtual Harlem. It says, augmenting humanities by turning history into reality. What do you think are the future of digital culture relates to our shared history and memories, and how can we ensure that humanity and inclusive culture are at the center of the digital technology?
Sorry about that. That's a great question. First of all, I think that it's very important that we allow people to tell their own stories. We've seen so many times in the past where those who've been marginalized the most have been less likely to be the purveyors of their own storytelling in order to tell others who they are and what they're all about. I think digital technologies can help democratize that, and I love the idea of the democratization that we've been talking about all morning long with regards to access and closing the various gaps regarding the digital divide. And we know that there's not just one digital divide. There's so many aspects to it, and it's a very complex problem. When I think about the humanities and digital technologies, of course, we in the humanities, we always like to joke around and say that we're the ones that not only point to the future for those in the technologies that ultimately develop those tools, but we also are ones that help keep those in check in as many ways as possible. We've seen various Afrofuturists as well as those that are writing speculative fiction predict the various technologies that we're now experiencing today. But when you think about how the not only the stories but our histories are wrapped up into that, the Virtual Harlem project done so many years ago, which actually introduced Bruce and Clayton and myself to one another back in the late 90s. That project was all about the memories that some are rarely taught or barely taught in our secondary school system, but not just explaining and showing them those memories, but also allowing them to experience it. And when you think about the power of virtual reality, this whole session is entitled Demystifying Tech. I remember at last year's Harlem Week, we did a whole session on demystifying technology to seniors and introducing them to the power of virtual reality and augmented reality, and they loved it. And just that, addressing that aspect that was mentioned earlier about knowledge and that being part of that digital divide, we had people there asking, how can I get one of those headsets, or what else can I see, and saying that they've seen these on commercials before but never knew anything about it. Part of one of the things I love to use as a demonstration of what you just asked, Claire, is a scene from one of my favorite series called Watchmen. I mean, I know many of you have probably seen it before. When one of the main characters goes into this building and gets an acorn, that's her entire genealogy, and she's able to place that acorn on another device, which then renders a three-dimensional version of one of her past relatives, right? And so when you think about how we're able to do that now, and how often those that are marginalized will never get their hands on that kind of technology in order to preserve the stories of their own families. I mean, that's what we hope to be able to continue to do work with Silicon Harlem in order to make that kind of technology available to a community that's not only underserved, but very, very often underrepresented in those kinds of fields.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carter. We here at Silicon Harlem are so happy that you bring up demystifying technology for seniors. It's one of our very popular workshops. So Shanna, Dr. Carter is talking about putting the human stories and human experiences at the center of the digital technologies. So how do you feel about that, and how could local governments do the same?
Yeah, I love that. I think that's exactly what it's about, right? Making it human centered. I think this reminds me a little bit of one of our programs that we're running, which is called collabs. And the whole idea of collabs is making it, it's all about the end user. I think this is looking from a design perspective. It's all about asking your end users and working with your end users, having them involved in the entire process of decision making and determining what the challenges are, and then determining what the solutions might be. To the history point, like if it's your story, you should be part of, involved in the process of telling that story and how to tell it and making those decisions. And so the Collabs program, we work directly with communities across New York City to identify challenges with the community, where we have a community engagement portion that takes a while, but it's all about building that trust and that relationship with the community to really understand, like, what decisions are you trying to make, and what kinds of challenges are you trying to face, and what would you identify as something that that perhaps we could try to address with a larger community, with government agencies. We actually launch innovation challenges out of this, and so asking kind of what do you really want to have some help with, and that's a risk, because when you go in, often I think in the tech field, it's easy to go in and say, I have this solution, let's just make it fit somewhere. So like solution plugging, but it really needs to be about problem solving. And so instead of coming into the community and saying, look, I think this is a thing you're facing, let me design some cool thing about it. This is about asking the hard questions and then accepting the hard answers. So if it's hard, we in Wood right now are working in mental health for Latinx youth and housing rights, tenant harassment, and abuse. Those are not easy issues, right? But we were able to work with them, and they said this is incredibly important to our community. And so as part of that decision-making process, we've now been able to release this innovation challenge. We're now currently choosing the winners that will be piloting in the community with some tech-enabled solutions specifically to those topics, and working directly with the community and saying, this is the very specific issue that we want to see faced. This is how we want to see it, addressed. Let's work together and actually build a solution. So it's a kind of an exciting, I think, way to make sure that your user is at the basis of your decisions.
Oh my gosh, Shanna, I think that's so right, that it's all about asking hard questions and being able to announce co-decision in the engagement process. So Dr. Carter, Shanna has been talking about the Innovation Fellowship and Innovation Challenge. Both are ways to connect tech talent with government services. So what are your visions for building a partnership between tech communities, such as Silicon Harlem community, with the local government?
Yes. Well, with the local government, I think part of that starts with training those up who are going to be a part of that local government eventually. We've got to introduce students to not only responsible and ethical uses of technology, along with whatever those new technologies are, but also introduce them to the ways that technology affects a variety of communities, which then can be incorporated into the various conversations that Shanna and her office, as well as the other government officials, are having. By having government officials who are knowledgeable in those technologies, that first then begins an intelligent conversation about whatever the ramifications are of that tech on various communities. Most importantly, though, I think, Claire, we got to talk about this, is that the representation of those who are at the table is so very important. Our last speaker was so very inspiring, where she was saying that she's at the table of TikTok and all these other companies, and I'm like, there needs to be more of that diversity in representation, because how can someone that's making decisions for a community that is not a part of that community make a responsible decision about folks that they either have very passing or very little information about, and if any firsthand knowledge about. And so we need individuals from these various communities to be a part of not only the tech revolution, but also understand as completely as possible the ramifications of those technologies, not only on their own community, but also communities like theirs around the nation and around the world.
Oh my God, thank you so much, Dr. Carter. I completely agree with representation is so important. We're all loving the dynamic between the two of you. Do you have questions for each other?
I do. Shanna, but go ahead. I'll let you go first, please.
Sure. I have one question specifically, because in hearing you talk about digital humanities, I'm just fascinated by this concept and by your work in this area. And in particular, you work with what you call virtual environments, I think, using virtual environments and visualizations to teach history and literature, which is not how my literature classes happened, right? And definitely not my history classes. I think we know that history in this country could be taught in a much more inclusive way. And so I'm really interested in how you've used technology that way. And I also had a question because I just mentioned the mental health challenge that we're doing in Wood, where we're looking at social isolation and mental health, and specifically for Latinx youth, but trying to get folks involved and improving their mental wellness, decreasing stigmas, decreasing social isolation. But have you seen any adverse impacts on the students themselves? Like when students are interacting with this kind of virtual environment, especially when they're talking about really interesting and perhaps tough topics like mental health or history, do they show like improved well-being, or do they end up being less engaged? Like how do your students actually react, and how does their mental health get impacted?
Yeah, that's a great question, Shanna. Thank you very much for it. Two things. First of all, by using various technologies in order to teach history through literature or teach literature through history, in the variety of ways that we can help students interact with that past. That's the key thing is the interaction and the engagement within historical past, in addition to reading about it and discussing it in a variety of ways. Virtual reality is one of those very powerful mediums that takes visuality, to a whole new level, where you can, step into the shoes of someone else. You can experience life as someone else has experienced it, and all those other things can be incorporated into the experience that have been programmed by the designers. Once again, then getting into who is actually designing these experiences, and is that an equal representation? So we have an opportunity to talk about all those things, because when you talk about design, you're also talking about the design of various locations in different cities that have been designed for certain populations. And so this notion of design, you talked about it a little bit earlier, where it's so very important with regards to the overall experience. As far as what students get out of it, it's varied. Very practically, we have some people and some students that just can't take VR. You've heard of VR sickness, and that's I think something that deals with not only the technology but also just some physiologies just can't stand that sort of type of immersion. But on another case, we have students with disabilities. In fact, just this summer, I introduced a new learning platform called Engage into my classes, and I had one student that had dyslexia and ADHD, and she told me in an email after the class was finished that this was a very first experience that she's been able to really focus in her classes, simply because there weren't so many distractions, and because it was so very experiential, that she had no time to get distracted or to get off track. And so I know that with disabilities, once again, when we get rid of that whole notion of access, there's where we then start to democratize the use and the creation of different technological tools. Part of the question that I have for you and your office is how is your office going to help make that happen? Working with groups like Silicon Harlem, I know they have an extremely strong connection with the community, and once again being able to forward that mission with regards to being able to introduce a community and provide access to advanced technologies. How do you see government playing a part of that in order to decrease some of those aspects of the divide that we've heard about?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and something that we were asking ourselves, right? Like trying to understand how to increase access. And then, this actually came up recently with the collabs, because we had like the selection committee and trying to figure out what kinds of finalists to select for this. What's the word I'm looking for this pilot, where they're trying to pilot these different sorts of technologies with the community. But we were asking ourselves and our community partners, like, what is it okay to bring like this very, very, is it better to have like very advanced type of technology, something that's VR based or has some component of AI or some immersion component, or do we want to have more traditional, like programmatic sort of solutions and folks that are, community organizers doing different things? There's a wide variety of applicants to this challenge. And I think that one of the things that came up through that was we want to provide that access to that kind of learning, to that type of cutting edge technology to this community first? Why should they be last? Why should they, why should other communities get to pilot things and test things and, make it mainstream before it ever arrives to other communities? And so that was something that came up in the conversation. I think more in a general perspective, like trying to have, just get folks engaged in civic technology and having access to technology. I think some other things we're thinking about are through the digital inclusion framework, where we have different programs we're trying to do. Like we have the tablets program that John mentioned earlier, which was distributing tablets to seniors across New York so that they were able to be connected and have, COVID related like healthcare and be able to talk to their families and just be connected again. So looking at ways to provide either the, is it the technology itself that needs to be provided, or the access to the technology, like our broadband access projects, or is it a chance to engage with the technologies specifically? So there's a lot of things happening there. And then we're also thinking about this on the entrepreneurship side and trying to find ways to empower Black entrepreneurs in particular with small business services. We're also looking very critically at like how my colleague Gary Johnson has been so focused on this, about how where in the process of entrepreneurship and funding are we not having accessibility? Are folks dropping off or not being engaged? And so one of the big things was obviously funding. So finding diversity and VC leadership, finding ways to fund early stage but very high growth opportunity founders. So these are some projects that are kind of in the works and conversations that we're having around the office.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carter and Shanna. Our audiences are also very inspired by your conversation, and they have asked some excellent questions. So I think this one is better targeted at Shanna. It's asking, this audience member is asking, with COVID, we have realized that we need to return to being more local. How can technology make us feel more local and stimulate local economies in communities?
Oh, that's such a good question. Yeah, I think COVID's made everything hyper local in some ways, right? I think it's made you really understand like what's happening to the people right directly around you, and especially when we talk about hotspots, we're at a neighborhood level now and looking at New York through the neighborhood lens and what's happening in a very specific neighborhood. I think in terms of getting involved with that through technology, well, this is a personal example, but I've been volunteering with a mutual aid group, and that was an interesting way to like really understand how basic needs are being met or not met at a hyper local, like just 2 streets over. I know the street names, in my own neighborhood, and trying to understand how my neighborhood is addressing that, and then finding ways using technology to address that. In terms of getting involved with like civic tech and getting involved with your government over technology. Yeah, that's a good question. I think so much of our work has gone online, just like this. This is a virtual summit. We're having virtual meetings. We're still holding virtual events and trying to do community engagement virtually now. So I think it's a case in some ways of just getting involved in that level of adapting to the new normal, I guess, of how to engage. But I also think this is a good question that I'm going to bring back to my own work and bring back to my team and see what are we thinking in terms of being available and more accessible to the community, and also having that 2-way communication that might have happened maybe more organically before. And so how can you get involved as a civic leader, or as a resident, as a person living in the city? So thank you for that question.
Thank you so much, Shannon. That's really great. We have another request that's more directed at Dr. Carter. Emily Chan is asking about a recommendation for a published paper or article about how technology is affecting society's lives positively or negatively. Dr. Carter, do you have any articles or paper that you want to share with us?
Yes, I can. If you'll definitely send me an email through my website, I can send you an entire bibliography of works. You can definitely start off though by going to the Alliance of Digital Humanities, and that's where you'll find the various digital humanities journals that really talk about a lot of these kinds of issues. You'll find not only peer referee journals there, but also conference proceedings, etc. There's so many sources there. You can check Medium as well as The Root, which often often has a number of articles about tech and society, and I think those are good places to at least get started. I'd like to talk about something that Shanna talked about here a little bit earlier with regards to access, as well as the ways that that technology can be used to bring us closer. In addition to Zoom, I always like to ask what the next innovation is going to be. We've already seen things that are going on with VR, and we've talked about full immersion, but not everybody can afford a $400 headset, right? We've talked about AR just a little bit, but not many people know about the various ways that you can still communicate in real time using augmented reality. Case in point, I was using an application the other day called Spatial, which allows you to scan a picture of your face, it maps it onto an avatar, and then you can either be in a VR environment with a full headset on, or through your phone, you can bring all those individuals into your real space, scanning the room and seeing those individuals there and there and there, and talking to them and manipulating virtual objects with one another. The reason I said that is because when you think about the ways that technology is evolving, the bandwidth that we talked about is coming online in so many areas, and once again, when we talk about that cost of that bandwidth, that's going to be something. But then when you look at how these technologies are building off of that bandwidth, assuming that access will eventually come, there is where I think the introduction of these new tools is going to be so exciting for folks to be able to say, oh, I can do that and see my and you fill in the blank, relative, husband, wife, whatever, right next to me, although they are 10 states away. I think we're going to have an amazing time over the next several years.
I completely agree, Dr. Carter. Speaking of immersion, one of our audience has been asking what kind of music fits that you and I are listening to. That's not immersion there.
I don't know. I don't have control over the music, so I'm not really sure where that's coming from.
So thank you all, Mutale, Shanna, and Dr. Carter. I'll leave the stage to the one and only Clayton Banks to introduce the next speaker. You.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Bryan. Thank you, Shanna. Thank you, Mutale. And you're wondering, why does Clayton have his mask on? Well, first of all, notice that the mask matches the color of the sports jacket here. So I just wanted to show you, how I'm